I walked into the wedding of my only daughter. The girl I raised with my bare hands, the girl I sacrificed every dream for. I thought I'd be welcomed with open arms. Instead, the words that came out of her mouth crushed me completely. "Dad, you weren't invited." "Please, leave." My chest tightened. My legs turned to stone. The air in that ballroom seemed to vanish, leaving me gasping as whispers rose from every corner. But I left quietly because what else could I do? What she didn't know was that within just 2 hours, her dream wedding would collapse into chaos. Not revenge, no. It was justice. Before I take you deeper, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, if it were you, would you stay and fight or would you walk away forever? The stem of the champagne glass snapped in my hand, liquid spilling onto polished marble, the shards scattering like fallen stars across the floor. Gasps broke the elegant chatter, turning every head toward me. My daughter, Emily, froze where she stood. Her gown, ivory silk stitched with crystals, the one I had signed a check for, trembled as she stepped back. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp but laced with fear of what the guests might think. I stood at the grand entrance of the ballroom, clutching the gift box I had wrapped myself. Inside lay a golden locket, an heirloom that once belonged to her mother. I had planned to give it to Emily on this very day, a blessing, a reminder of family. But now the scent of imported lilies filled my lungs like poison. White blooms arranged in tall crystal vases towered over every corner, their beauty suffocating me. The chandelier above scattered fractured light across golden wallpaper that had cost me 3 months of savings to secure. A wedding I had financed, yet I was treated like a stranger. "Sweetheart," I said softly, my voice betraying the storm inside me. "It's your wedding day. I came to congratulate you both." Then Michael appeared, her groom. His tuxedo clung perfectly to his tall frame, his polished shoes clicking against the marble as he slid to Emily's side. He wrapped a possessive arm around her waist and smirked at me, as if to remind me she was no longer mine to protect. "Mr. Henry," he said smoothly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." My brows furrowed. Misunderstanding? I turned to Emily, searching her face. But the little girl who used to run barefoot in the yard, who begged me to push her higher on the swing, was nowhere to be found. All I saw was a bride trying to erase her own father from existence. Emily's gaze darted toward the guests. Dozens of eyes pierced us, hidden behind crystal flutes and jeweled smiles. Women in designer gowns whispered behind manicured hands, while men in suits pretended to look away but strained to hear every word. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she spoke, voice tight with embarrassment. "This is a private celebration," she said. "Immediate family only." Her words were like knives dipped in ice. 27 years of sacrifice collapsed in an instant. 27 years of double shifts, of dinners alone, of every dollar saved for her dreams instead of mine, all reduced to a sentence. I swallowed the fire rising in my throat. My hand trembled as I tightened my grip on the small box. And then, my voice broke the silence of the hall. "I paid for this wedding, Emily." The orchestra stopped playing. Forks clattered against porcelain plates. The guests froze, their stares sharper than blades. Even the chandelier's crystals seemed to rattle, echoing the tension, suffocating the room. For the first time that night, Emily couldn't meet my eyes. Emily lowered her gaze, her lips pressed tight, as though my very presence had poisoned the air around her. Michael's hand tightened around her waist, drawing her closer as if shielding her from me. His voice cut across the silence, calm yet cruel. "Mr. Henry, let's not make a scene. This is Emily's special day, not yours." A ripple of laughter, faint but cruel, slithered through the crowd. My jaw clenched. Every guest seemed to hold a glass higher, every smile sharpened into judgment. "I'm not here to steal her day," I replied, my voice low, steady, but carrying across the ballroom. "I'm here because I love my daughter." Emily flinched, her eyes darting to the nearest table, where her bridesmaids sat whispering, behind sequined sleeves. She didn't answer. She wouldn't. Michael's smirk deepened. "Then the most loving thing you could do is leave." I inhaled sharply, forcing myself not to break. "Not here, not in front of them." My hand shook as I raised the gift box. "This," I said, my voice rough, "was her mother's. The locket she wore the day we promised each other a life together. Emily, it was meant for you, for this moment." Gasps broke again among the guests, the weight of the heirloom cutting deeper than any champagne toast could. A flicker, just a flicker of recognition flashed across Emily's face. But Michael's grip only grew firmer. "She doesn't need trinkets from the past," he said coldly. "She's building a future with me." The insult stung sharper than any blade. A murmur of agreement rose from one side of the hall, where relatives of Michael nodded in approval. My fingers curled into fists. "Everything here," I said, my voice trembling with restrained fury. "The flowers, the hall, the gown on her back. It's built on my sacrifices. Yet tonight, I stand treated like a beggar at my own daughter's door." Emily's chin quivered. Her eyes glistened, but still she said nothing. Michael tilted his head, smiling like a man who knew he'd won. "Security," he called smoothly, without even raising his voice. Two men in black suits moved from the corner of the room, their eyes fixed on me. The guests whispered louder now, some pitying, some sneering, all waiting to see how the story of the humiliated father would end. But I did not move, not yet. I stood tall, gripping the locket box against my chest. "One day," I said, my voice carrying over the gasps and murmurs, "you'll remember who stood by you when no one else did. And when you do, Emily, it may be too late." The chandeliers flickered, as though the very room itself had absorbed my words. And for the first time I saw fear, not in Emily's eyes, but in Michael's. For the first time that night, Emily couldn't meet my eyes. Her lashes trembled, her fingers twisting the silk of her gown. Michael, however, met my gaze without a flicker of shame. "That's enough," he said coldly, his words slicing through the stillness. "Security will handle this." The two suited men advanced, but the room's attention had shifted. Guests leaned closer, whispers rising louder than the music that had once filled the air. I could hear fragments. Did he really say he paid for it all? Is that true? Her father. Thrown out? Doubt had seeped in, poisoning the perfect fairy tale Michael had staged. I straightened my back, the weight of humiliation burning in my chest. Yet I refused to bow. "Tell them, Emily," I said, my voice softer now, almost pleading. "Tell them who kept the lights on when there was nothing in the fridge. Tell them who sold his truck so you could have that dress you're wearing." Emily's lips parted. A flicker of guilt shimmered in her eyes before. Michael's hand closed around hers like a trap. He leaned close to her ear, whispering something, and her shoulders stiffened instantly. "She doesn't owe you explanations," he sneered, raising his voice to the crowd. "This man is bitter. He's trying to ruin our moment." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, siding with Michael. Others avoided his eyes, sensing the cracks forming in his carefully built mask. My throat tightened as I held up the small gift box. The golden locket inside felt heavier than stone. "This was her mother's," I said, my voice trembling. "The woman who gave her life. The woman I promised I would protect." Tonight I wanted Emily to carry that promise into her future. Gasps rippled through the crowd again. One of the older women covered her mouth with her hand, her jeweled rings glittering beneath the chandelier light. Emily's eyes watered, her resolve faltering. But before she could speak, Michael snatched the box from my hands. "This belongs in the past," he spat, tossing it carelessly onto the nearest table where it slid, teetered and fell to the floor with a hollow clang. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Every eye was now fixed not on me, but on him. And in that silence I knew the cracks had begun to show. Justice was coming. The golden locket lay on the marble floor. Its chain twisted, the delicate clasp snapped. Gasps rippled again, sharper this time, carrying judgment not toward me, but toward Michael. I bent slowly, my knees aching, and picked it up with trembling hands. I brushed the dust from its surface, cradling it as though it were flesh and blood. My voice cracked, but I made sure every guest heard me. This was the only piece of her mother left for her. "And you—" I turned my eyes on Michael, fire burning through the humiliation. Treated it like trash. The silence was thick, suffocating. A few of the older guests shook their heads, murmuring under their breath. Someone hissed, "Shameful." Michael's smile faltered just for a moment. His jaw tightened as he tugged Emily closer, but the mask he wore had begun to slip. "She doesn't need sentimental chains weighing her down," he snapped, his voice louder, harsher. "She's moving forward with me." But the words rang hollow. Guests were no longer smiling. Some avoided his eyes. Others looked at Emily with sympathy. The fairy tale veneer of his perfect wedding had cracked. Emily's face flushed red. Her hands twisted nervously at her waist, her eyes glassy. She looked at me just for a second, as if silently crying out. But fear chained her tongue. Michael turned to the security guard still lingering nearby. "Remove him now." The men stepped forward, but hesitation flickered in their eyes. They weren't sure, not after what they'd just witnessed. I straightened, my voice rising, raw and unyielding. You can throw me out of this hall, Michael. You can tear me away from my own child. But you can't erase the truth. Every chandelier here, every flower, every note the orchestra plays, it's all bought with my sweat, my sacrifice, and you dare call me a stranger? The crowd erupted into whispers again, louder, more insistent. He paid for it? Is that true? Then why throw him out? Michael's face twisted, anger leaking through his carefully polished smile. Enough! He barked, slamming his glass onto the table so hard it shattered. Emily flinched at his side, the sound like thunder against her fragile frame. The room grew colder. The whispers turned into stares, sharp and accusing, all directed at him. And for the first time that night, Michael looked like the intruder. I stood there, gripping the broken locket against my heart. And deep inside, I knew this night wasn't over. The cracks had only begun. Justice was coming. The orchestra's final note died in the air, silenced not by design but by fear. The shards of Michael's glass glistened across the floor like 1,000 tiny daggers, each reflecting not only the glittering chandeliers above, but the unraveling truth none of them had come. Expecting to witness, Emily stood frozen beside him, her hand still trapped in his iron grip, her knuckles paling under the pressure. She looked like a porcelain doll, delicate, beautiful but one touch away from shattering. And me? I stood not as an uninvited guest, not even as a father humiliated. I stood as the living embodiment of sacrifice, every bead of sweat, every dollar scraped together, every sleepless night dedicated to giving her a future, all of it standing in the shadow of a man who thought himself greater because he wore a tuxedo, tailored tighter than his smile. I pressed the locket, broken but unyielding, against my chest. This, I whispered, though my voice carried through the stunned hall, was her mother's. It was meant to remind her that love built on loyalty, on sacrifice, lasts longer than silk gowns or chandeliers. And you, my eyes bored into Michael. You crushed it as if it were meaningless. The crowd stirred, their whispers swelling. Faces blurred into a sea of raised brows and shifting mouths, the fragrance of expensive perfumes mingling with unease. The fairy tale had cracked, and like spilled wine, the truth was staining the golden floor for all to see. Michael straightened, squaring his shoulders, trying to summon control. He doesn't belong here, he snapped, his voice slicing the air. This is our day, Emily's day, and he is nothing more than a bitter old man trying to drag us into his misery. But the words did not land as he hoped. There was no chorus of agreement, no warm applause to smother his outburst. Only silence, sharp, thick, dangerous. One guest, an older woman in a navy gown, shook her head slowly. No man should speak this way of a father, she murmured, loud enough to draw eyes. Michael's jaw tightened, his mask slipping another inch. He tugged Emily closer, as though possession were proof of love. But possession has edges sharper than devotion, and the guests saw it. Emily's lips quivered. She looked at me again, just for a heartbeat, as if her soul had reached for mine. The memory of her as a child, her hair in messy braids, her knees scraped from climbing trees, flooded back into me. She used to call me her hero, and now? Now she looked like a prisoner waiting for someone to break her chains. I stepped forward once. The security guards flinched, unsure, but didn't stop me. My voice rose, trembling not with weakness, but with the weight of years no one in that hall could measure. Emily, I said, my eyes locked to hers, you may be ashamed of me tonight. You may let this man silence you, chain you, and parade you like a prize he has won. But remember, when the guests are gone, when the chandeliers go dark, when silence fills these halls, it will not be him who remembers who you were as a child. It will not be him who recalls your laughter echoing in the yard, your tears when you fell, your dreams whispered at night. It will be me, only me. The words cracked something inside her. Her shoulders trembled, her eyes glistened. But she didn't speak, not yet. Fear was still the leash around her neck. Michael's smirk returned, jagged and desperate. Security, he barked again. Remove him before I do it myself. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. One stepped forward reluctantly, but his hesitation was obvious. Then, like a spark in dry grass, whispers erupted again. Why would she allow this? He's her father. He paid for it all. And this man throws him out? I saw the way he grabbed her wrist. Michael's head turned sharply, scanning the crowd. Sensing control slipping from his hands, Rage flickered in his eyes, and in his desperation, he made his mistake. He yanked Emily's wrist higher, his grip brutal. "Tell them, Emily," he hissed. Forgetting his audience, "Tell them you don't need him. Tell them he means nothing." A horrified gasp spread across the room. Emily winced, her face tightening with pain. The bridesmaids rose, their sequined gowns shimmering in the chandelier light as one of them cried out, "Michael, stop!" The older man from earlier, perhaps one of his uncles, stepped forward as well, his voice sharp. "Boy, let her go before you disgrace yourself further." The tide had shifted. No longer was I the intruder, Michael was. Emily's tears fell freely now, streaking down her perfect makeup, leaving trails of truth no designer could conceal. She tried to speak, but the words choked inside her throat. Still, the sight was enough. The guests didn't need her voice to know the truth. They saw it plain as day. I held the broken locket higher. "Do you see now?" I demanded, my voice booming in the cavernous hall. "This is not love. This is not family. This is control dressed in silk. And you—" I pointed at Michael, my voice quaking with fury. "You may fool some with your charm, but tonight you have shown your true face." Michael's composure shattered. His voice rose into a snarl, spitting venom in every direction. "You are nothing," he screamed. "Nothing but a washed-up man who couldn't give her more than scraps. I gave her this life, not you." The irony dripped heavier than the wine in their glasses. Guests gasped at his words, some shaking their heads, others openly glaring now. And then Emily spoke. Her voice was small, cracked, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "No, Michael," she whispered, her body trembling. "You gave me chains. My father gave me everything else." The hall erupted, not in cheers, not yet, but in a thunder of whispers, of approval, of judgment raining down not on me, but on the man who had thought himself invincible. Michael froze, his face pale, his grip finally releasing Emily's wrist. She stumbled back, and for the first time in years, she looked at me not with shame but with recognition. "Dad," she breathed, tears spilling freely now. I held the locket tighter, my heart breaking even as strength filled my chest. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with years of pain and love. I never stopped being here. The guests' stares burned into Michael, their murmurs sharpening into condemnation. He tried to salvage it, his voice cracking as he raised his arms. "She's emotional, overwhelmed. This is nonsense." But no one believed him anymore. The fairy tale was dead. The mask was gone. And in its place stood a man exposed, naked in his cruelty, his greed, his hollow charm. And so the wedding began to unravel, not with the cutting of cake or the tossing of flowers, but with the truth, raw and undeniable, crashing down like thunder on a night too long delayed. Michael had tried to humiliate me. Instead, he had exposed himself, and everyone in that glittering hall knew. The nightmare had only just begun. The hall erupted in chaos, not with screams, but with the sound of truth ripping through the gilded veil of lies. Emily's sobs were no longer silent. They trembled through the space, raw, unfiltered, stripping away the polished perfection of the night. Her mascara bled into rivers, streaking down a face that had been painted for photographs, not for pain. Michael's grip faltered under the weight of so many stares. He had built his empire on charm, manipulation, and carefully rehearsed masks. But in this single instant, when the world looked at him and not through him, his mask slipped completely. His face was not of a groom. He was a jailer, a tyrant. "Let her go," I repeated, but softer this time, with the steady calm of a father who has nothing left to lose. The broken locket dangled from my hand, shards of silver glinting like judgment under the chandelier's light. Michael's jaw clenched. "She is mine." His voice cracked, frantic, not commanding. "She chose me. Not you, not your pathetic life of debts and pity. Me." His arrogance was gasoline. His words, the spark. One of the guests, the older man in the navy suit, stepped forward, his cane striking against the marble with finality. A man who needs to proclaim ownership of his bride is no husband. He is a coward. The crowd stirred. Murmurs swelled into condemnation, each voice growing stronger. "He hurt her. I saw it myself. She didn't choose pain." Emily's knees buckled, and at last she tore her hand free from Michael's grip. The sound of his fingers snapping open, desperate and defeated, was like the release of chains. She stumbled, and I caught her, not as a rescuer descending from the heavens, but as the same father who had caught her countless times before, from the scraped knees of childhood to the heartbreaks of adolescence. To this, her fall on the night meant to crown her joy. "Dad," she whispered, her voice broken but alive. The syllable so fragile yet so sacred it shattered every wall inside me. The hall went silent again, waiting, watching. Michael staggered back a step, his face pale, sweat purling on his forehead. This is a mistake," he hissed. "Emily, don't do this. Don't ruin us. Think of what they'll say, what they'll think." But Emily shook her head, her tears falling onto my shoulder. "I don't care what they say. I care about the truth." The words hit harder than any blow. For the first time, Michael was stripped bare, without allies, without adoration, without control. I rose to my full height, Emily still trembling against me, and I turned to the crowd. This wedding was built on money, on vanity, on lies. But love, real love, was never here. I gave my daughter everything I could. Not for applause, not for repayment, but because that is what fathers do. And yet tonight I was cast aside, treated like dirt by the very man who claims to love her. That is not love. That is ownership. That is greed. The orchestra, forgotten until now, lowered their instruments. Even they leaned forward, their silence part of the chorus of judgment. Michael's fury exploded. He lunged, his hand reaching for Emily again. But this time he was stopped, not by me, but by two groomsmen who intercepted him, pinning his arms back. His roar echoed, animalistic, guttural, as the crowd recoiled in disgust. "You fools," he spat. "You're nothing. She is mine. This is my day." "No," Emily said, her voice clearer now, trembling yet resolute. She stepped out of my arms and stood tall, her wedding dress torn slightly where Michael's grip had bruised her skin. "It's not your day. It was supposed to be ours. But love cannot be built on control. I see that now, and I will not chain myself to a man who sees me as property." The audience gasped again, but this time it was not in horror. It was in awe. The bridesmaids rushed forward, surrounding Emily like a wall of shimmering protection. The older man with the cane nodded solemnly. "Bravery, child. That's what makes a woman, not the ring on her hand." The tension broke and whispers turned into applause, hesitant at first, then swelling like a tidal wave. People stood, clapping, some even shouting encouragement. The fairy tale had ended, but in its place rose something stronger: justice. Michael thrashed against the groomsmen, but his power was gone. He was no prince, no savior, no husband. He was just a man revealed, his kingdom of lies crumbling in front of him. Emily turned back to me, her hand reaching for mine. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should never have let it get this far. I was blinded, but you were always the one who truly loved me." I squeezed her hand, my throat thick. "You don't need to apologize, Emily. You only need to live free. That is all I ever wanted for you." The chandeliers above seemed to flicker, their lights reflecting in the broken glass on the floor like 1,000 tiny stars, each one bearing witness to the rebirth of a daughter's soul and the vindication of a father's love. As Michael was dragged from the hall, screaming curses that no longer had weight, I felt Emily's grip tighten in mine. For the first time that night, the heaviness lifted. Not because the pain was gone, it never truly goes, but because truth had been spoken, and truth has the power to cleanse even the deepest wounds. I looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of the guests who had once judged me, who had once whispered behind flutes of champagne. Their gazes now held something different: respect. And in that moment I knew justice had finally spoken. The ballroom was quiet, but not the quiet of peace. No, it was the quiet of aftermath, of truth spoken so loud they silenced the world. The chandeliers still glimmered overhead, scattering rainbow fragments across walls that hours ago had seen nothing but wealth and vanity. Now those same walls bore witness to something rawer, truer, almost holy: a daughter's rebirth, a father's vindication, and the fall of a man who had disguised chains as vows. Michael was gone, dragged out of the hall by men who had once toasted him as a brother. His curses still echoed faintly in my ears, but like a fading storm, his voice had lost power. The heavy oak doors had closed, and with them the era of his lies. Emily's hand, small yet trembling with a new kind of strength, still rested in mine. She was no longer clinging out of desperation. She was anchoring herself, reclaiming the ground that had been ripped from under her. I looked down at her, and though her mascara was smudged, her lipstick worn away, and her dress slightly torn at the hem, I had never seen her more beautiful. For the first time since she was a child, her eyes were not clouded by expectation or fear. They glowed, not with the sparkle of a bride dreaming of fairy tales, but with the steady fire of a woman who had faced betrayal and survived. "Dad," she whispered, though the hall was vast. Her voice carried like a hymn, filling every crevice. "I thought I knew love. I thought sacrifice meant silence. I thought devotion meant surrender. But it wasn't love, it was fear, dressed as love. I thought I was choosing freedom, but I was choosing chains." Her words cut me. Not because of their pain, but because of the courage it took to speak them here, in front of hundreds. In front of the ghosts of every choice she thought she had made. The little girl who used to hold my hand at the park, who once begged me not to leave her bedroom until she fell asleep, had returned, not as a child, but as a woman who finally remembered her worth. I brushed my hand against her hair and kissed her forehead, something I hadn't done in years. "Love never comes with chains, Emily," I said softly. "It comes with wings. It lifts you, not cages you. I can't fight all your battles, sweetheart, but I can remind you of the strength that's already yours." Her tears wet my suit, but her spine straightened. Her chin lifted. My daughter was standing again, not on trembling knees, but on the foundation of her own truth. The guests who had once whispered about me behind crystal flutes of champagne now stood in stunned silence. Some looked ashamed, others curious, and a few even seemed inspired. They had come to witness perfection, a spectacle of wealth and status, but instead they had seen truth peel back the golden marble, leaving something far more raw and eternal. The officiant, who until then had been a statue upon his pedestal, finally moved. His long robes swayed as he stepped down. His solemn face, weathered by years of witnessing vows both pure and hollow, turned to Emily. Then his eyes found mine. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice echoing, resonant, carrying the authority of Scripture and the warmth of humanity. "You owe no vows to a man who is unworthy of them. The only vows you must speak tonight are the ones you owe to yourself." Gasps stirred the air, followed by a heavy silence. Emily's breath trembled, her chest rising and falling as though she were about to leap into icy water. Then, with deliberate grace, she slid the ring from her finger. The diamond, once a promise, now gleamed like a shard of deception. She held it high so all could see. Her hand did not shake. Then she let it fall. The ring struck marble with a sound sharper than a whip, a metallic crack that cut through the hall. The tiny circle rolled in a mocking spiral before settling among the broken crystal. From the champagne glass I had dropped earlier, two symbols of false celebration shattered together at our feet. The crowd gasped, and some even cried out, but Emily didn't flinch. She drew in a deep breath, lifted her chin, and spoke. "I vow to never silence myself for love again. I vow to honor the man who raised me, not the man who tried to break me. I vow to live free, to live true, and to never forget who I am again." The silence that followed was brief, but it was the silence of awe. Then, as though an unseen signal had been given, the hall erupted. Applause thundered, not polite but visceral. Women pressed their hands to their hearts. Men wiped at their eyes. Some guests stood and clapped until their palms reddened. Others shouted encouragement. For the first time that evening, there was celebration, true celebration. Not of wealth, not of appearances, but of courage. I stood beside her, my chest swelling with pride so fierce it nearly broke me. My daughter, my little girl, had reclaimed herself, not because I saved her, but because she had chosen to step into the light of truth. And then she turned to me. Her arm slipped into mine, gentle but sure. Her voice, though quiet, silenced the hall. "Let's go home, Dad." Those words pierced deeper than any wound and healed me all at once. It wasn't just a request. It was a return, a reconciliation. A declaration that everything I had lost tonight had been restored tenfold. We walked together, step by step, through the same grand aisle that had been meant for her walk to a husband. But now it was a walk away, from lies, from fear, from betrayal. Every guest moved aside as though the sea itself was parting. Some bowed their heads, some clasped their hands as if in prayer. For once all eyes were on us, not in judgment, but in reverence. The grand doors opened. The cold night air swept in, cleansing the hall of perfume, money, and deceit. Above us, the stars glimmered like sentinels, brighter and truer than the chandeliers left behind. Emily looked up at them, then at me. Her lips trembled into a smile, weary but radiant. "You were right all along, Dad. Love isn't about the perfect day. It's about the people who never leave." I smiled, tears warming my eyes, though they no longer carried the sting of grief. "And I'll never leave, Emily. Not now, not ever." We stepped into the night. Behind us, the marble prison of lies crumbled in memory, but ahead of us stretched freedom. The wedding had ended in ruins, but in those ruins grew something stronger: truth, freedom, and the unbreakable bond of family. And as we walked home, father and daughter, survivor and protector, I knew this night was not a tragedy. It was a rebirth. For the first time in years, I felt peace.